क्या आप IAS की तैयारी कर रहे हैं और कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट्स को 2.5 लाख तक की फीस नहीं पे करना चाहते? अगर हाँ, तो 22,500 रुपए में घर बैठ के StudyIQ के पेनड्राइव कोर्स के साथ आप IAS की तैयारी कर सकते हैं। आज ही विजिट करें StudyIQ.com।
Hello friends and welcome to StudyIQ. In this lecture, we will discuss about the seniority of the Supreme Court judges. Why the seniority of the Supreme Court judges has become an important current affair these days is because of the swearing in ceremony of the 3 new judges in the Supreme Court. So recently 3 new judges took charge in the Supreme Court as justices in the Supreme Court, and after the swearing in ceremony, a few of the sitting judges, that is the already existing judges in the Supreme Court, met the CJI, Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, to lodge a protest against the lowering of seniority of Justice K.M. Joseph. So the seniority of Justice K.M. Joseph was questioned by the sitting judges, and that is why the seniority of the Supreme Court judges has become an important issue, and it is often seen in the news these days. In this lecture, we will deeply analyze this issue and see what are the provisions associated with it. First of all, let us quickly see what is Justice Joseph's case. So, the elevation of Justice K.M. Joseph to the Supreme Court itself was a matter of debate, and I have taken a lecture on the elevation of Justice K.M. Joseph to the Supreme Court. And for those students who have not watched that lecture, I will quickly give you a brief about the case of Justice K.M. Joseph. The Supreme Court Collegium is responsible for recommendation of the names of the Supreme Court judges. So, the new judges to the Supreme Court shall be recommended by the Collegium of the Supreme Court, and this Collegium consists of Chief Justice of India plus 4 senior most judges. So, the Supreme Court Collegium consisting of the Chief Justice of India and 4 other senior most judges of the Supreme Court recommended the name of Justice K.M. Joseph in the early 2018. So, that time Justice K.M. Joseph was the Chief Justice of Uttarakhand High Court. And after making this recommendation, this Collegium has to send this proposal to the central government, to the law ministry. While receiving this recommendation by the government can either accept the proposal or send this proposal back to the Collegium for reconsideration. So this is the 2 options that are left with the central government. But in the case of Justice K.M. Joseph, what did the central government do? It did not accept, and also reconsideration was not sent back. So what happened was, this proposal was withheld with the central government for a long period of time. And after a period of almost 3 months, the central government had sent back the proposal suggesting the name of Justice K.M. Joseph back to the Collegium for reconsideration. So the central government adopted the second option they have, that is reconsideration of the name, and this was sent back to the Collegium. And what happens when the Collegium receives this name for reconsideration? The Collegium can either accept the proposal of the central government, or the other option left with the Collegium is to unanimously pass the resolution. So, in the case of Justice K.M. Joseph, the Supreme Court Collegium unanimously said that we cannot accept the reconsideration by the government, and in that case the government is bound to accept the recommendation of the Collegium. So the government cleared the appointment recently. And what has happened in between? There was a delay from the part of the government in clearing the proposal, and this delay has caused Justice K.M. Joseph his seniority within the Supreme Court. So there was a delay of a few months, and this has affected his seniority. And because of this, 2 consequences are there. One, this will hinder the chances of the justice to become CJI. And secondly, the Supreme Court Collegium had recommended the name of Justice K.M. Joseph ahead of Justice Indira Banerjee and also Justice Vineet Saran. And these people also sweared in on the same day. So, what did the government do? The government placed Justice K.M. Joseph's name last in the seniority. And this is the issue. Now let us see how is the seniority decided in the Supreme Court. Before that, how is the appointment made? Article 124, subclause 2 2 of the Constitution says that every judge of the Supreme Court shall be appointed by the President of India by his warrant under his hand and seal, and this should be after consultation with the judges of the Supreme Court. So, President appoints the judges of the Supreme Court. And how is the seniority of these judges decided? The seniority within the Supreme Court is decided on the basis of the date of induction in the court. And if suppose the date of induction is the same, for example, there were 4 judges who were inducted on the same day, what is considered the time of induction is considered in order to decide the seniority of these judges. So we can say that if there are 2 or more judges taking oath on the same day, who becomes the senior? The person who takes the oath first becomes the senior. And how is this order made? If there are more than 1 judges who are taking oath on the same day, there will be an order by which the oath taking will take place. And this order shall be proposed by the Supreme Court Collegium, who recommends the appointment of the Supreme Court judges. And in our case, what has happened? The Supreme Court Collegium had recommended the name of Justice K.M. Joseph ahead of the other judges Indira Banerjee and also Justice Vineet Saran. And what did the government do? The government had placed Justice K.M. Joseph last in the seniority. So the government did against the recommendation of the collegium. And also we have seen that when the Supreme Court Collegium had given the recommendation for elevating Justice K.M. Joseph to the Supreme Court, the government had withheld the proposal. And this period wherein which this proposal was withheld, it has caused a loss to the seniority of this particular judge. And the other issue, that is, the collegium placed K.M. Joseph's name first, but the government placed it third. So what happens? He will lose his seniority. So in 2 ways, Justice K.M. Joseph have lost his seniority. The first one was through withholding the recommendation of the collegium by the central government, and secondly by placing the name of Justice K.M. Joseph third for the oath taking. So in these 2 ways he has lost the seniority. For example, if we take the present CJI, Chief Justice of India, Deepak Mishra, and another Supreme Court Judge, Chalameshwar, they were inducted on the same day. But the present CJI, Deepak Mishra, administered oath first, and therefore he became senior to Justice Chalameshwar. So recently we have seen that Justice Chalameshwar had retired from the Supreme Court without becoming the CJI. But Deepak Mishra was also inducted on the same day, but he became the CJI. Why? Because he had administered the oath first before the Justice Chalameshwar administered the oath. So the same thing has happened with the case of Justice K.M. Joseph as well. He administered the oath third, and this will affect his seniority. Now let us see what are the allegations against the government. First of all, we have seen that Supreme Court Collegium had given the recommendation to the central government with regard to elevation of Justice K.M. Joseph to the Supreme Court. The central government had delayed his appointment. So this delay itself has caused him loss of seniority. So that is the first allegation. And the second allegation is that even on the day of swearing in, he was placed third as against the recommendations given by the same collegium to put him on the first based on his seniority. And this has also affected his seniority. And due to these 2 reasons, his seniority is in question now. So this loss of seniority for Justice Joseph is because of the actions of the central government, and this is the allegation against the central government. And this loss of seniority is going to affect Justice K.M. Joseph in 2 ways. One is, this will prevent a possible rise of this justice to the CJI. So he had the potential to become the Chief Justice of India, but because he lost his seniority, there is lesser chances he will be elevated to the CJI. And secondly, seniority is also a criteria for heading the benches of the Supreme Court. Now, because Justice K.M. Joseph has lost his seniority, he will be getting benches only after the other new judges, that is Indira Banerjee and Vineet Saran. So these two judges will get the benches first, and only later on Justice K.M. Joseph will get the bench. Now let us see what is the government's view regarding this allegations. The government has denied this allegations, and the government replied that the central government received all the three names on the same day. That is the name of Justice K.M. Joseph, Justice Indira Banerjee and Justice Vineet Saran. So three names were received by the central government on the same day. And the central government says that they have treated all the names equally, going by the principle of inter se seniority in the All India High Court Judges Seniority list. So these three judges were the High Court judges, and the central government argues that they have followed the principle of inter se seniority. And the government also argues that they did not consider the original dates of recommendation as having a bearing on the warrants provided by the Supreme Court Collegium. So the government's view is that this was not intentional. And coming to the government's view on withholding the proposal given by the Collegium for the elevation of Justice K.M. Joseph to the Supreme Court, the government argues that if Justice K.M. Joseph would have elevated to the Supreme Court, it will affect the regional balance of the Supreme Court. And this was the reason the central government had given the proposal back to the Collegium for reconsideration. So Justice K.M. Joseph is from the state of Kerala, and there are other judges also from the same state in the Supreme Court. So if there are more than one judge, this will affect the regional balance of the Supreme Court. That was the argument given by the government while returning the proposal to the Collegium for reconsideration. You can find the PDF of this lecture on my Facebook page. Thank you.
क्या आप आईएएस की तैयारी कर रहे हैं और कोचिंग इंस्टीट्यूट्स को 2.5 लाख तक की फीस नहीं पे करना चाहते? अगर हाँ, तो 22,500 रुपए में घर बैठ के StudyIQ के पेन ड्राइव कोर्स के साथ आप आईएएस की तैयारी कर सकते हैं। आज ही विजिट करें StudyIQ.com।